Alrighty, we're 2 minutes over the hour. I think it makes sense to get started. My name is Ryan. I lead the offshore wind team within Esgian, offshore commercial team within Esgian. I see many clients that have logged on. I see names that I recognize, but also many new names. So first and foremost, thank you all for attending today. For those of you that do not know who Esgian is, we're headquartered in Oslo, Norway, and we're a market intelligence and data analysis firm for the ocean industries. We're operating in three main verticals. That's rigs, shipping, and offshore wind. My focus being 100% offshore wind, and today we obviously speak on offshore wind. As some of you know, each month we do host this short webinar that covers a current and relevant offshore wind topic. We do our best to keep these to 19 minutes. Today's might be a little bit over, but we'll do our best. We do understand time is precious, and we want to provide you with the highest quality information in the shortest period of time possible. If you haven't already, I do encourage you to follow Esgian Offshore Wind on LinkedIn and sign up for our newsletter to be kept up to date on all future events, news, and our quarterly reports. Also on our website, you'll find a free interactive offshore wind mapping feature that I encourage everyone to check out. Within Esgian Offshore Wind, we offer an award-winning subscription-based digital platform that provides transparency and clarity into the global offshore wind market. Our clients that use this tool are developers, companies within the supply chain, vessel operators, consultancies, and more. We're primarily assisting our clients with business development, competitive analysis, strategic planning, with data all in near real time. We're updating the platform on average over 50 times per day. In addition, we've recently released a new and separate tool that sits on top of the Wind Analytics platform. This tool monitors and quantifies the power production of operational wind farms globally, and it is highly relevant for our discussion today, in which we will discuss the great discrepancy in project performance. But not only do we have project performance, we have data broken down by turbine supplier, nominal power, and model, but also by region and operator. This tool has primarily been developed for the financial market, allowing one to benchmark performance against reference projects, identify financial risks and opportunities ahead of market updates, uncover key drivers behind under and over performance, plus so much more. But I do want to emphasize that all the information that we'll cover today has been analyzed by our team of analysts from our digital databases. And with that being said, I'm excited to have Ajay and Oliver with us today, who will be talking and discussing on the bulk of today's presentation. Ajay, why don't you take it away?
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Okay, so for the next few minutes, we'll look at some of the findings from a newly launched power generation module that Ryan was referring to, and do a deeper dive into offshore wind project performance from various angles. And what we'll try to do is to explain why there is such a large discrepancy in how well projects perform. But before we do that, I think it's worthwhile to spend a couple of minutes on giving a quick update on the power generation module to kind of contextualize the data that I will present. So on this slide, you see a table from the platform itself, and the intention is not that you are to read the data, but more to show you what the landing page of the module looks like. So in the power generation module, we monitor the power generation from 83 different wind farms globally on an hourly basis. And we are currently covering all offshore wind countries in Europe, in addition to the US and Taiwan. And altogether, we cover approximately or almost 80% of the operational projects globally. And we continuously add new projects and countries to the module. And the data that we source is entirely coming from official sources, and it's all official data. So we don't make any sort of changes or modifications to the numbers. And in addition to the power generation numbers themselves, we also provide insights into the reasons of various outages. So for us, this module is not only about how much power is being produced or generated, but it's also about when a project is underperforming and why it is underperforming. And as Ryan mentioned, the power generation module is entirely integrated with wind analytics, which allows us to do the type of analysis that I'll show you very shortly. And this is an important point because it's this integration of the power generation module with wind analytics that allows these value-adding analysis and insights. Okay, so to start, here on this slide, we have presented the power generation performance of 3 different projects. And what you see is that the line here represents the capacity factor for these 3 projects over the past year on a daily basis. And I know that the font is very small and it's difficult to read what the slide is actually saying, but Oliver will very shortly go deeper into the details on these projects. So we'll come back to that later. So no worries in that sense. And the 3 projects that we have selected are Gode Wind 3, that's the top left one, which is a German project and one of the few projects with an 11 turbine that has come online, and which is also the reason why we have selected this project. And then the second project is the top right one, that's Hornsrev 3. It's a Danish 8 megawatt turbine project, which is selected because it's one of the best performing assets that we track. And it can showcase an impressive almost 48% capacity factor over its lifetime so far. And then you have a bottom left corner, that's Triton Knoll, which is located in the UK North Sea with 9.5 megawatt turbines. But this project is running at significantly lower capacity factor than its peers, and particularly if we compare it to Hornsrev 3 and Gode Wind 3. And as I just mentioned, Oliver will very shortly give a deeper dive into the 3 projects, but still already now we see some interesting things here. So what we see in the bottom right chart, there we have placed all these 3 projects side by side for comparison. And one thing, or firstly, what's a bit striking here is that Hornsrev 3 is again and again hitting max production and has done so consistently over a long period of time. So it's a very good performing, high performing asset. And then secondly, it's interesting to look at the commissioning period for Gode Wind 3. That was very short compared to Triton Knoll. So what that means is that Gode Wind 3 went from first power to full commissioning, full power generation, meaning also full revenue generation, in less than 10 months, while it took Triton Knoll almost twice as much time to do the same. And this is also something that Oliver will come back to later. And then it's also worthwhile noticing that the project performance is not following the conventional assumption that larger turbines will give a higher capacity factor. So in this case here with these 3 projects, it's actually the project with the smallest turbines that's performing the best. And this is also something that we'll come back to very shortly. But the reason why I keep referring to the capacity factor is that this is to a large extent what defines the economics of a project. So as an example, what we can kind of showcase is that for a 1 gigawatt project with a CFD price of 130 euros per megawatt hour, a 1 percentage point difference in capacity factor equals 11.4 million euros per year in revenue. So meaning over a 10-year period, we're talking about 114 million euros because of that 1 percentage point difference. So how much power you can squeeze out of the wind is extremely important for project economics. So when we talk about efficiencies, the picture becomes even more interesting when we dig into various turbine sizes and how the capacity factor develops with increasing sizes. And as I just mentioned, as opposed to the conventional assumption that turbine efficiency increases with turbine sizes, the data that we have on these 83 wind farms globally doesn't entirely support that view. So what you see on this chart here is that the capacity factor increased, or the average capacity factor increased when the turbine sizes jumped from 4 megawatts to 6 megawatts, but that it has since actually stagnated around 40%, even though the turbine sizes have increased to 8 megawatts and 9.5 megawatts. We also have data for 10 megawatt turbines and 11 megawatt turbines, but here we're showing performance over a 3-year time frame to smoothen out any kind of seasonal wind patterns that are specific to a certain year. So the 11 megawatt turbines become visible if we had shown only the 1 year numbers, for instance. So, but you can reach out to Ryan after the presentation if you want some more details into that, and we can set up a separate meeting. And then, so as I said, that the capacity factor seems to have kind of stagnated around 40%, even though the turbine size has increased. And then you see to the very right, the 9.5 megawatt turbine. That is quite interesting because now you see that the capacity factor actually plummets to 31%. And the first thought could be that this is a troubled turbine platform that has some major issues. But then I can inform you that's not, that the picture is far more colorful than that. So because the reason is that there are currently only 3 operational projects with this turbine size in operation, of the ones that we are mapping out. So it becomes important to look closer at these 3 projects to explain why the capacity factor is so low. So if we look at one of the 3 projects, that's Triton Knoll, which we briefly visited earlier in the presentation. And that project has struggled with a faulty export cable, which at times has taken out a large part of the power from this project. And of course, that has a major impact on the capacity factor. And the second project is Moray East, which is also in the UK. And this is exposed to extensive curtailments due to grid constraints between the Scottish and the English border. And for those who are not necessarily too familiar with the curtailments or what that means, this is when the transmission of the TSO, or the transmission system operator, orders the wind farm operator to reduce power generation, typically due to limited capacity in the transmission system or in the grid. So our numbers, what we have in the power generation module, look at the actual power generation from the wind farms and not what the wind farm could have produced if there were no curtailments, just to keep that in mind. So to summarize that though, so while the overall picture indicates that the capacity factor is not showing the increase that one would expect from increasing turbine sizes, one can't immediately conclude that this is entirely related to turbine performance, even though it's often easy to get blinded by the turbines because of their importance in a wind farm. And that leads us to the next slide, where in fact our data shows that it's not the turbines that are the weakest link in a project, but it tends to be cables, and more specifically export cables. So out of the 88 outages or outage events that we have registered on our platform, almost 1/3 are associated with export cables. And this is particularly concerning given how important the export cables are when it comes to a project performance, and therefore also, of course, the revenue generation. I'd like to mention at least that this chart does not show the entire picture because it includes only unexpected failures and only outages that are visible that are visibly significant to project's performance. But still, even though it doesn't show the whole picture, it's clear that export cables are a vulnerable component in a wind farm, and probably that one place where you want to put some extra redundancy if you want to ensure against operational stoppages and interruptions. And with that, Oliver, I hand it over to you.
Perfect, thank you, RJ. So for the second half, the intention today then is to take a quick look around the platform. We definitely feel this is the best way to tell some of these stories around power generation, to actually get in and take a quick look at the data. So I'm going to look at those 3 projects that RJ highlighted and try and bring some of those themes to life using these real examples. So first up, selected here, Horns Rev 3 as the project from the 80+ that we have. So a Vattenfall project, it's been operational now for about 6 years or so, since 2019, the summer of 2019. If we go down to the chart, and I spend most of today looking at these charts, just to quickly explain what we're looking at here. We begin with the gigawatt hours, on this axis, on the vertical axis. What I'll do to allow us to compare very quickly across projects, I'll change that to a percentage so that this matches the data that RJ was showing. We're looking at a capacity factor here as a percentage of the total initial capacity of those projects. And that, as I said, allows us to compare these projects. The other quick change I'll make, I'll just scroll up here very quickly. We default to the 1-year view. I'll just move that to a 5-year view so we get a bit of a longer time horizon. I can explain what we're looking at here for Horns Rev 3. So we've got 5 years of data on here. What you can see are the expected fluctuations. This is what we would expect to see from a project that's performing consistently well. When the wind is strong, the wind resource is good, it's reaching up into the 90s, close to the hundreds of percent here. So when it's topping out very close to 100, it's clearly performing optimally. And then, as you would expect, when the weather falls away, the wind yield drops, it can then fall down. So you would expect to see these sorts of fluctuations depending on the weather conditions. So for Horns Rev 3, it's performing very well, and that wind resource is really driving that performance. You can see 1 or 2 fallouts where there's some scheduled, some unscheduled maintenance, but this really only happens for a couple of days at a time. That translates, just to give you some sort of benchmark number here to allow you to understand those comparisons. Here, if we look at these data here on a 5-year time frame, we're looking at a capacity factor in excess of 46%. And that's pretty consistent across most of those numbers, 45% for the last 6 months, for instance. So a consistently very well performing project, and that hitting around 45, 46% long-term capacity factors. So that's one that's performing well, as RJ mentioned. Let's bring in God of Wind 3, also performing very well. And we can see God of Wind 3 hidden a little bit behind here in the green color. Let me just remove Horns Rev 3 for a second from this. Far right of the chart, you can see the startup for God of Wind 3 that actually went to COD earlier this month. So it's been producing some power ahead of the official COD. You can see that ramp up line as they bring that power online. Reason we're interested in God of Wind 3, that was a number of reasons. We obviously want to check that it's doing well, this Ørsted project in Germany. But it's one of the most recent projects that we have that's come on stream. So we're always interested in what the slope of that ramp up curve looks like. Are they able to bring these projects online quickly, efficiently, and reach that full capacity as soon as possible? And this one performing exceptionally well. Let me just reset to the 1-year time frame to zoom in on that, because it was squeezed in on that right-hand side of the chart. So you can see the comparison between both of them, peaking out slightly different times, depending on the various weather conditions that they're experiencing in slightly different locations here between Horns Rev 3 and God of Wind 3. It's exactly the same set of data that we're showing, 5 years versus 1 year. This is just zoomed in. Let me just get rid of Horns Rev 3 from the data and leave us just with God of Wind 3. So you can see that ramp up as they're bringing the turbine units, the cable strings on stream. It's actually been producing, even though COD was earlier this month, for about 12 months, 10, 12 months now, probably closer to 10. But you can see during this ramp-up period, as a project is getting up to that full power generating mode, there is an impact on those shorter term data patterns. So it will pull down those averages. And that's really the explanation about why RJ was looking at those 3-year data sets earlier. We're trying to, for those really longer term dynamics, to remove any long commissioning periods, for instance, from those data sets. So getting over a longer time period allows us to have more confidence in those average numbers. The main reason that we wanted to look at God of Wind 3 out of those 80 plus projects that we've got data for is really around turbine size. God of Wind 3 is a really good indicator of what we can expect potentially for these larger models. This is using a Siemens Gamesa 11 megawatt turbine, and clearly now been producing power for a fair amount of time. And the early signs look pretty positive for this larger scale turbine. Project showing good results, but it's worth pointing out that they're not quite as high as Horns Rev 3. But like I say, still early days for this project, but looking positive. Let's bring in the third project that RJ mentioned. We'll bring in Triton Null to the data set. Here we go. That's showing now in the pink line. And we'll add that to the 1-year time frame. Triton Null operated by RWE. Been operational now. Let me just scroll down so you can see a bit better. Been operational for 3 years or so. Been generating power for a little bit longer than that period from when it became fully operational. This image can get a little busy when you add in too many lines, so let's isolate it a little bit. Let me remove the green, let me remove the blue. So we're just left with Triton Null in pink. And you can see here the impact of what RJ was talking about in late December 2024, so very much towards the tail end of last year on the right-hand side of this chart over here. You can see that power generation was restricted by approximately 50%. Doesn't take a genius to work out there's 2 export cables on this project. They lost one of those export cables. There was a power trip on December the 27th that removed capacity completely for one of those export cables. And you can very easily see in the data that 50% drop that they had. Let me bring back Horns Rev 3, and you can see Horns Rev 3, I know slightly different area of the sea area, but regardless, you can see that they were still able to produce a much higher numbers in that period when Triton Null lost 50% of its export capacity. So last look at this, let's jump back to the 5-year horizon and just move things back and look again at the pink line. Let me remove all of the others and just bring in the pink line. Let me get rid of God of Ender 3. So we're only looking at Triton Null here. In the longer term issue, we focused in on that near term problem that they had here at the end of last year. But you can see this project has had a few cable issues over that 3+ year lifetime that it's had so far. Most notable is this one here. Back in November 2021, they were actually off for about 6 months or so. Again, 50% of the capacity lost through an export cable issue. So let's try and bring this to some sort of conclusion, bringing it back to RJ's slides, comparing turbine models and turbine sizes. Triton Null, which you can see here in the pink, is using a 9.5 megawatt Vestas turbine. It's a fairly small sample size that RJ was looking at, as he mentioned. Just 3 projects that we have 3 years consistent data available for. But the key point we're trying to show here is that you really do need to dig a little bit deeper and understand some of the specific reasons behind these projects' lower or higher capacity factors. They're often not specifically related to the nacelle. In this particular instance, very much export cable related. For us, the devil is very much in the detail. So one of the reasons to pull out Triton Null here is Triton Null really does stand out as one of the projects that's suffered over the last 3 to 6 months or so in terms of its power generation. This is in a key winter period, clearly, which is when the wind resources will be higher. That downtime even more expensive when they should have been driving higher capacity factors through that project. So one of the more significant problems that we've seen recently, although worth pointing out that it is now back online and functioning as expected and in line with other similar projects as well. Hopefully that then gives you a sense today of some of the data that's contained in the power generation module and how it can potentially be used. I think to bring it together, a lot of the talk in the offshore market is always about the potential of ever larger turbine models. That's clearly of great interest to us and also the wider market. However, we're just as interested in what happens with what's now operational, those larger models that are entering the operational phase now and entering power generation. How will that now impact the performance of the installed base today? So let me leave it there, Ryan, and pass it back to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Oliver and Ajay, for your insights there. It's always a pleasure. I do want to encourage questions. I see a couple already coming through. So if you do have some questions, please type them into the Q&A. While we do wait on some questions coming through, I do also want to mention that I put the link to the free interactive map in the Q&A section, so feel free just to copy and paste or click on that to get to the interactive map. Now to the questions. First one. Let's see. So would you say that the turbine megawatt, or rather how big the turbine is, does not impact as much as the export cable issue does? Curious, as we are seeing a continuous drive for bigger and bigger turbines.
Yeah, well, maybe if I pick that one up, and RJ, if you've got any comments, feel free.
Yeah, sure.
I think the short answer to that is yes, turbine size definitely matters. It's a question of physics. It's no more complicated than that. The issue will be if you get a cable failure on the export cable side, it is going to cause you big problems. So it's more complex than saying, is it just the turbine megawatt size? And there are ways, as RJ mentioned, to build redundancy into these projects. But export cable, when it goes, is a fundamental issue and can wipe out some of the gains that you get from the bigger turbines.
We can use the earlier or last year, the East Anglia one. They lost an export cable for 6 months. A very rough estimate from our side was that was those 6 months because of one power cable, one export cable took out around 1% of the power generation for that project over its whole lifetime. So I guess that's the issue, that the export cables, it's not that they are down all the time, but once they go down, the impact is huge.
Yep, great comments.
So that's just showing the East Anglia impact there. Again, on the right-hand side, you can see the impact of that cable going for East Anglia 1.
Yep, great. And we do have a number of questions coming through here, so I'm going to push through these quite quickly. Next one, do you have any data in regards to power generation for companies with or without digital twin technology?
I think in a way this leads on to the next question. So, or another question that I saw in there. So maybe we can kind of pull that a little bit. Someone asked, and the question seems to have disappeared, but someone asked around what might drive improvement in capacity factors. How can you increase that number? I think digital twin is clearly one of those options. We're seeing a lot of interest in what may potentially happen with artificial intelligence here, that you can drive better maintenance regimes through this. You can also see extensions on the blades or boosters on the turbines that will have a pretty quick and important effect on increasing that capacity factor. So there are a whole range of different options available, either for the maintenance regimes or for the developers to look at here. Digital twin, definitely one of those.
That's great. 2 questions in one, Oliver. One more question that I see here. What led to the drop or stagnation of capacity factors from 4 and 6 megawatt to 8 megawatt turbines? And were there no cable or curtailment issues?
I can start with question 2, whether there were cable or curtailment issues. I guess it's very project specific, but yes, the short answer is yeah, there were cable issues, there were curtailments, and that's kind of baked into the numbers when we look at the average capacity factors. So ideally, you would go into every single, or as a user, you would go into every single project and look at the history of the project, and that's why we have the event timeline, so they can look at kind of the causes of all these power outages or power reductions. So, and when it comes to the drop or the stagnation in the capacity factor from 4/6 to 8, because the data sets we have on both 6 megawatt turbines, or the installed base on 6 megawatts and 8 megawatts, is quite significant. We're talking about gigawatts of installed capacity operational projects. And we are highlighting both curtailment, export cables as issues, but that doesn't necessarily mean that nothing is related to turbine performance. It's not that there are apparently there seems to have been some kind of an issue with increasing the efficiency of the turbines when you go from 6 to 8. So it's not all to blame on the export cables. There are indications that the 8 megawatts, for instance, haven't necessarily performed as efficient as one would perhaps hope.
A great insight, Ajay.
I
These were
would
really...
also add on that to sort of defend the opposite position in a way is that this is nuanced. There's a lot going on here. The 8 megawatts have not been operational for as long. And so you may start to see operational performances. They've got a long lifespan. It's not just 3 years that they're working for. So we may see that change over. I would expect to see these things change over time. It's dynamic set of data.
No, excellent. No, these are great questions that are coming through. I do want to encourage, as there's no additional questions that have come in, but if you do have any questions, we are available for discussion, or if you would like a deeper dive into the database and certain projects that you want to look into, we're more than happy to have those discussions and how it could potentially help your firm. One last thing I want to touch on before we conclude. Part of the team, 4 of us, will be in Copenhagen for Wind Europe. We always enjoy talking to clients, prospects, and friends. So feel free to reach out to me directly. Be more than happy to have a one-on-one discussion in person. Those are always great. So with that being said, thank you very much for your time, and hope to see you next month on our next monthly webinar. Have a great day, guys. Thanks, Ajay. Thanks, Oliver.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.